It's a lovely sunny winter's morning here in Tasmania. We've had a little light frost this morning, but we've got nice sun and we've been getting good sun over the last couple of days despite some frosty mornings. And that's really nice weather. As the days are now beginning to get a little longer, I notice that things are starting to come alive again, starting to grow. Today I've got a few jobs to do in the garden and I thought I'd bring you along. It's going to be a mix of things. A couple of days ago I got in and did quite a bit of cleaning up and a couple of other jobs. Unfortunately, I didn't think to bring the camera along. I will show you what I've done though first and just give you a little rundown on that, but that won't be too long, and then we'll get into today's jobs. Today's jobs involve planting a couple of things, and possibly we'll also get to a little bit of pruning. So the first and major job that I got into a couple of days ago was to clean up this section, which was the tomato area from summer. I did show it to you in the last film and how full of weeds it was growing up, and I simply hadn't got to cleaning it up. So I took the trellis away and I didn't remove any of the weeds, any of the greenery, any of the mulch that was there. I've simply covered it all underneath this plastic, and I will simply let that compost naturally over the next month, or probably 2 months actually, before I'll touch that and need to do anything. So by that time it should have rotted down a fair bit. I was a little bit short on plastic, and so to get that plastic I removed the plastic that I had covering the area that I intended to plant broad beans. Because I took the plastic away from this area, I decided I really should plant the broad beans straight away. It was a little bit earlier than I intended to. Basically, in some ways I was breaking my own rules. I normally say I don't plant in July, but it was getting very close to the end of July and about 2 weeks earlier than I would have planted normally. So I've put in 3 rows of broad beans here. I always keep my own seed for broad beans. Really easy seed to keep, and keeping it from one year to another, it's always really nice and viable. So they mightn't move too quickly, but I think in the next month they'll probably be out of the ground and underway. The other job that I did was to come here into the greenhouse and do some cleanup. You may remember from the last video that I had the old tomatoes here and they had finally finished, the vines had completely died, so I decided to pull those out. And also the capsicums, they were dying, and so I decided to pull those out. It's quite unusual actually, because capsicums some years will actually survive through winter and will come again for another crop, and I've had that in the past, but this year they seem to all be dying off, so I decided, right, they're coming out. So it's here in this bed that I have taken the tomatoes out that I'm going to do the first planting today. I have some broccoli plants that I've decided to put in here, and I think bring them in here at this time into the greenhouse will give them a nice quick start and give me some nice early broccoli in the spring. So first thing that I need to do here is to get a bit of blood and bone into it, and then to get some compost, a little bit more compost on top, and then I'll put them in. Now this is a fairly thin layer of commercial compost that I have added, and it's pretty dry. It's certainly not hot. It's cold compost. It's been sitting in my keep for a couple of weeks, and of course probably where I got it from for a month or two. So it's well and truly got away from any heat, but it is very dry and wouldn't take water so well. So what I'm going to do is put the sprinkler on these sprinklers on and let that run for an hour or so before we come back and plant, and just get some moisture into it. One of the things that I did while I was cleaning up in here a couple of days ago was have a think about where I'm going to plant the crops coming into spring, and particularly where I'm going to plant the next lot of tomatoes in here. And I've decided these two beds. There's this one beside me that's got parsley in from last year that a lot of that needs to come out. I'll leave a little bit often as a transition, but most of that will need to come out when the tomatoes go in. And I'll probably put just 2 tomato plants into each bed. Also, I'm going to put tomatoes into this bed beside me, which has got all the chickweed in it and a few other plants, but the self-sown stuff that comes up. But I will plant just 2 plants, and I will try espaliering them this year along the style that Charlie uses in his garden that I saw there, and see how that goes. So in order to have those plants, I could just go and buy some advanced plants, but I've decided to have a go at raising a couple. So I have put in some seed for Legend and for Sindel, and I'm germinating that in the house at the moment. So during the day it goes in the sunroom in the sun, and at night it goes over the fire where it keeps nice and warm. Hopefully that gets some nice quick germination. I get some little plants coming along. It's still going to be probably a little later than I would have if I went and bought some advanced plants, but still in another 4 to 6 weeks I should have something that I can actually put into the grow house here. Probably about 6 weeks really would be the point. I haven't yet planted the seed for my spring summer crop of tomatoes, the main crop. I'll probably do that in a couple of weeks' time. Well, probably a month or more ago, I put in some seeds in this bed, along with the snow peas over there, for some red onions and from spring onions. Now, when I planted those seeds, I was a little bit doubtful because the seed was quite old. I've seen no sign of germination. There's a lot of other germination going on here, as you can see, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But because I've got no germination of the things that I would expect from what I've planted, I've decided that as the season's moving on and I want to get them underway, I've gone and bought some plants. So I have some couple of punnets of red onions and also some spring onions here to go in. Now, the germination that you do see here, some of it is weeds, but quite a high percentage of it is volunteer plants, things that have gone to seed around here that are actually useful. And I actually want to utilize some of those. I'll bring the camera in closer and let you have a look what's coming up. Hoping that you can see and can identify, there is some here that are definitely brassicas. Now, they are likely to be kale because there was kale growing in this area that went to seed. But these others, like this one here, and quite a few of these that have the larger, broader, light green leaf, like this one, I believe are lettuce. Now, I could still be proved wrong. It's often, when they're very young like this, difficult to get 100% identification. But those lettuce, they're going to be really good if they're lettuce plants, which I'm pretty certain they are. So in planting the onions and the spring onions today, I'm going to try and minimize my disturbance of the plants that are coming up. That will mean that I need to come back and weed more thoroughly later, but it's worthwhile to get those plants. Now, of course, I'm going to lose some of them. So it's up this end. I'm going to put in a couple of rows and put the spring onions in. So there's not as much germination up here because the plants that went to seed were at the other end of the bed. Now, with the spring onions, you could actually take these out and break them up individually and soak them, but I don't mind them growing in clumps. And so I'm just going to utilize these clumps. Now, if you do break them up individually, you'll probably get more larger spring onions. I always soak them in a little bit of water as a good way to separate them if you're going to do that. But actually I might break this one because it's a pretty big one, if I can get a couple out of it like that. Just roughly. I don't mind if I lose a plant or two because there's a lot there. We'll get those in. And again, this one's pretty big clump, so I'll try and split that apart. And that'll get some quick spring onions underway. I haven't planted this one. The ground is undisturbed. I've only added compost to the top, so it still can be fairly firm down below. Right, that looks nice. So with the onions, I'm doing the same thing. Now, unfortunately, I am going to lose some of my lettuce plants. But if I wasn't trying to save these plants, I would completely stir this whole bed up, because that way you get a head start on any weeds that are coming up. So there's half a dozen clumps in here. Now again, you could separate these out to make sure you get bigger onions, but I'm quite happy to grow the onions in clumps. I've done that before, and you get some larger, some smaller. Ultimately, they're all useful. These are mostly salad onions anyway, so quite useful to get some smaller ones. Oh, they've got some good root systems down there, and I'd like to get those down if I can. Okay, so they're all in the ground now. I will get the hose and give them some water just to settle them in. Useful to do that. We're not expecting any rain for a few days, and some of these other lettuce plants that I've disturbed, with a bit of water, they might settle and survive too. So we'll see how we go. Well, I'm back after a 3-hour break. Had a visitor, and that's just the way life goes. But of course, this was watering in the meantime. Hasn't been on all that time, but I probably should have had it on that long, because it's actually so hydrophobic. The surface looks wet, but it's still dry. Most of the compost, the water's been sort of soaking through around, but hasn't really saturated it. So I'm just going to have to put these plants in and water around them. Now I've laid out the half dozen plants that I had in the punnet. This is broccoli, and the variety is Magic Dragon. Now, Magic Dragon or Green Dragon are probably my preferred varieties to grow when I'm buying a punnet. They do give a nice big head, and I find despite cutting that, they will still come with more shoots and continue to produce 2 or 3 rounds of cropping. I always think, yes, I'd like to grow from seed. I've never been able to find the seed for these varieties. The ones that I have grown from seed, I've never been overly impressed with how they grow. So I keep coming back to buying a punnet when I'm growing broccoli. So I've spaced these out fairly wide because they do grow into quite a big plant, and they will move quite quickly here in the greenhouse. Now, a friend of mine has been telling me how good calendulas are at keeping away aphids. And because I've had problems over the years with aphids, particularly on the kale, also sometimes with broccoli, but that's generally later in the year. But the kale particularly, I've found, gets aphid problems. So I've got some calendulas here that are volunteer, and so I'm going to dig those out and transplant them to where the kale is growing. There was a volunteer crop of calendula here. It flowered nicely. wasn't actually planted here. It came from Elizabeth's flower garden last year, but as a result we have more volunteer plants, so I'm going to try and get these out. Oh, that's interesting. That's coming out as a piece, so not from a seed at all. That one, little one's a seed. What I want to avoid transplanting, of course, is grass and other weeds. I'm trying to avoid disturbing their roots. Some of them, like this, have had considerably more root disturbance than a block like this will probably be more successful. So I came in and did some cleaning amongst this kale the other day, and I've also put around some pellets for the slugs and snails because there was a little bit of attack. Now I find this one quite interesting because it's a shoot off a larger root, and it must have been buried at some point, but we'll put it in and hopefully these will transplant. So of course I could have gone and bought some plants or got some seed, but having these volunteers, you might as well use them. I'm just going to plant them all around the base. They'll give some nice colour. If they don't work, well, that's okay. At least we'll enjoy the flowers. But it'd be really nice to have something that really was successful at keeping those aphids away. My friend said he'd used these with roses and found they worked well. And again, I better come back and give them a little bit of water, as I've disturbed them a bit. They've come out of quite clay soil, so they're really going to be much happier in here and do a lot better in this richer compost. Okay, I have one more thing to plant before I finish planting for the day, and that is what I've got in this bag, which is Jerusalem artichoke. Now, I've grown Jerusalem artichokes in the past, but not for quite a few years now. And I got these off a friend. We enjoy eating a limited quantity of Jerusalem artichokes. Not something that you really want every day, but in small amounts we quite enjoy them. So I'm going to plant a few. They will grow reasonably well without much attention. So I regard them as a really good survival food, that when you really need something, you'll probably have some there in the winter to harvest. But of course they're very good for you in terms of their health qualities. So we'll grab that and find a place to put them in. They need somewhere that they can stay reasonably permanently because they are a crop that's most of the year they're there, and the easiest way is to just leave them in the ground and fertilise and just let them come up again. I see here that Pepper's enjoying the sun coming through from where we cut the tree down about a month ago. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had the sun in this section of the garden. So from that perspective, it's a big improvement. So this section that I've decided to plant those artichokes in is down here in the bottom of where the hazelnuts and the kiwis are, it's a spot that they can stay and be undisturbed for a long period of time. In this section you'll see the hazelnuts are looking quite good. We've got some green shoots coming, and this of course has changed a fair bit with some grass growing here now. But yes, everything's looking quite happy. Now this bit of ground is quite wet. There's a little bit of grass in here which I don't particularly want, so I'll try and get that out. But I'm not overly fussy, so I'll probably come back and mulch these when they come up, which will control the grass. Pretty clayey down in this corner, but it's not too bad. It'll be good enough. I rotary hoed this probably in the autumn somewhere it was. We'd had a couple of things growing in here that didn't do very well across summer, but a bit of blood and bone is called for to enrich this ground. Oh, what's that filming? Not that well. And we'll mix that in. This is not the ideal tool for making rows, but it's the only one I carried with me, so I'm too lazy to go back and get another one when I can do it this way. These are actually nice pieces of artichoke. I would have enjoyed eating them, but can't eat it and grow it at the same time. Right, so covered back up and they're ready for springtime. Like I say, I'll probably come and mulch this. It wouldn't actually hurt if I cut some compost and put that on here now. It'd really enrich the soil. Put a wheelbarrow load on. I might just do that. Now this bit of ground is quite wet. There's a little bit of grass in here which I don't particularly want, so I'll try and get that out. But I'm not overly fussy, so I'll probably come back and mulch these when they come up, which will control the grass. pretty clayey down in this corner, but it's not too bad. It'll be good enough. I rotary hoed this probably in the autumn somewhere it was. We'd had a couple of things growing in here that didn't do very well across summer, but a bit of blood and bone is called for to enrich this ground. And we'll mix that in. These are actually nice pieces of artichoke. I would have enjoyed eating them, but can't eat it and grow it at the same time. Right, so covered back up and ready for springtime. Like I say, I'll probably come and mulch this. It wouldn't actually hurt if I cut some compost and put that on here now. It'd really enrich the soil. Put a wheelbarrow load on. I might just do that. So I'm back with some compost and I'm just going to spread that over the top. Like I said, it'll help suppress weed growth, enrich the soil, and also help mark this spot for me so I know where I've actually planted them until they come up. It has multiple benefits in that way. I'm going to go get myself an audio book and go and do some potato digging now. It's last day of July, and by the middle of August, so just a couple of weeks away, I need to get all the potatoes out of the ground. I've got a fair few to dig. My back doesn't like digging more than a couple of bucketfuls at a time, so whenever I get the chance I go and do a couple, and next day do a couple more, so on, we get them out of the ground. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with another video.